What if I told you that one of the most influential writers of darkness, mystery, and psychological horror in human history did not simply die, but disappeared into a final chapter so confusing that it still refuses to be solved even today? His name was Edgar Allan Poe, a man who wrote stories that explored the darkest corners of the human mind, where guilt becomes alive, where fear takes shape, and where reality slowly breaks apart under invisible pressure. He understood madness so well that readers often wondered whether he was describing imagination or experience. What the most disturbing irony of all is that his own death became the most confusing story ever attached to his name. Not a story he wrote, but a story the world still cannot finish. No final explanation, no confirmed timeline, no reliable witness account that ties everything together. Only fragments scattered across history, like broken glass that refuses to form a single reflection. It all began in late September 1849. Poe left Richmond, Virginia, headed north toward Philadelphia. On paper, it was a simple journey, nothing unusual for a writer at that time. But sometimes, the most ordinary beginnings lead to the most unexplainable endings. In the days before his disappearance from clear records, some people later claimed Poe did not seem fully stable. Not in an obvious way, not in a dramatic collapse, but in small, unsettling details. Moments where he would stop speaking mid-sentence, as if forgetting what reality required him to say next. Moments where his attention would drift, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Moments where his expression would shift from focus to confusion and then back again, as if something inside him was unstable. Then, the record becomes silent. No confirmed diary entries, no verified travel logs, no reliable witnesses describing his exact movements. Just gaps. Long, uncomfortable gaps in the story of a man who should have been traceable. Until October 3rd, 1849. Baltimore, Maryland. A discovery that would later become one of the strangest unsolved cases in American literary history. A man was found lying on the ground. Unconscious, disoriented, barely responsive. His clothing was not his own. It was worn, mismatched, and dirty, as if it had been taken from someone else entirely. Those who found him did not recognize him. To them, he was just another unknown man in distress. But his condition was what made them remember him. He was not simply injured or sick. He appeared completely detached from identity itself, as if the concept of who he was had been erased. When people tried to communicate with him, he struggled. He could not answer simple questions. He could not confirm his name. He could not explain how he arrived there. His speech broke apart in fragments, sentences that never completed themselves, thoughts that never reached their destination. And then came the most disturbing detail of all. A single name, repeated again and again. Reynolds. No one reacted to it at the time as something meaningful, but history would later turn that single word into one of the greatest mysteries of the case. Because no one ever confirmed who Reynolds was. No known associate, no clear connection, no verified identity that fits cleanly into Poe's life. It remains unclear whether it was a real person, a distorted memory, or something entirely internal, a fragment of a collapsing mind trying to anchor itself to something familiar. The man was eventually taken to Washington College Hospital, and from that moment onward, his condition only deteriorated. Doctors observed a disturbing pattern: brief moments of awareness followed by complete confusion. Moments where he seemed to recognize surroundings, followed immediately by disorientation. He would open his eyes, stare at people as if trying to understand their existence, then lose focus again, as if consciousness itself was flickering. Medical understanding in 1849 was extremely limited. There were no neurological frameworks like today, no brain imaging, no standardized diagnoses for complex mental or neurological conditions. So doctors could only describe what they saw, and what they saw was unsettling. A man losing coherence between mind and body. Some witnesses described him as restless. Others described him as frightened without cause, as if reacting to something not visible in the room. But whether that fear was real external perception or internal hallucination remains unknown. As days passed, his condition worsened. He became weaker, less responsive, more detached from reality. His speech became rarer, his awareness shorter, his confusion deepened. And still, that single word sometimes returned: Reynolds, like a broken signal repeating in a collapsing system. No one could decode it. No one could connect it to anything verifiable. Then, after several days of decline, October 7th, 1849, he died. No final statement, no coherent last message, no explanation for the condition he had been in. Just an ending without closure. And for a brief moment in history, the world did not even fully realize who had died. Only later was the identity confirmed. And when it was, the confusion deepened, because the man who died alone, disoriented, and unidentified at first was none other than Edgar Allan Poe, a recognized writer, a figure already known in literary circles, yet in death reduced to anonymity, not remembered as a famous author in his final moments, but as a nameless patient in a hospital bed. And from that contradiction, the mystery truly began. Because now the question was no longer just about death. It was about everything before it. What happened in the missing days? Where did he go between Richmond and Baltimore? Who saw him last? Why was he wearing clothes that were not his? And what did Reynolds mean? Over time, multiple theories emerged. One of the most widely discussed is the cooping theory, a form of election fraud that existed in 19th century America. People would be kidnapped, kept under control, sometimes intoxicated or beaten, disguised in different clothing, and forced to vote repeatedly at different polling locations. Baltimore, during that era, was known for such political corruption. This theory could explain several elements: the strange clothing, the disoriented condition, and his proximity to a voting location. But it still leaves major gaps. It does not fully explain his prolonged delirium. It does not explain his mental fragmentation. And it does not explain the repeated mention of Reynolds. Another theory focuses on alcohol. Poe had a complicated history with drinking, and some accounts suggest extreme sensitivity to alcohol. Even small amounts were sometimes said to cause severe reactions. But again, this explanation is incomplete. There is no definitive evidence confirming heavy intoxication at the time he was found, and alcohol alone does not fully match the neurological collapse described. Another possibility is medical illness. Modern interpretations suggest epilepsy, brain tumor, stroke, infection of the nervous system, or other neurological disorders. Any of these could potentially produce confusion, hallucination-like states, and progressive decline. But without medical records, this remains speculation. There is also the possibility of assault or robbery, yet no consistent physical trauma was documented. No clear evidence of severe external injury, which leaves the case suspended between possibilities. Every theory explains something, but none explain everything. And over time, the evidence itself became unreliable. Records were lost, testimonies conflicted, details changed depending on the source, as if the truth itself was dissolving over time. What remains today is not resolution, but uncertainty. A writer who mastered stories of psychological darkness, ending his own life inside a real-world version of that darkness. Not through a written plot, but through an event that refuses to be structured like one. And maybe that is why this story still survives. Because the human mind struggles with incomplete endings. It searches for closure even when none exists. And in the case of Poe, closure has never arrived. Only theories, only fragments, only silence where answers should be. And even now, more than a century and a half later, the death of Edgar Allan Poe remains one of the most haunting, unresolved mysteries in literary history. Not because humanity has no answers, but because every possible answer still feels incomplete. Like a story that continues, even when the final page is missing. And maybe that is the final irony. A man who spent his life writing about the unknown became something the world can never fully know. And so the question remains, not just how he died, but whether the truth was ever meant to be found at all.